Espera, que nos pintamos la cara.
Modesto.
Venga. Ahora ahí.
Pero mirad una para el frente, como si estamos haciendo algo, ¿eh? Mirad al frente.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we please take our seats? We are already 20 minutes behind schedule. So I would ask whoever would like to stay for the session to please take their seats. And for those who are just catching up with the previous session, to do it in the corridors. I promise you there is very nice food and coffee outside. So unless you are interested in the session, I would be more than grateful for you to please take your seats. Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all of you. I hope you had a pleasant and nice lunch. I know I didn't because I didn't have time, but it looked good. And I declare open the session of this afternoon. My name is Nawal Al-Hosseini. I am the permanent representative of the UAE to IRENA, and I would like to start by thanking the President of the Assembly for inviting me to preside over this very important ministerial roundtable. I would like now to invite the Assembly to turn to Agenda Item 8, Ministerial Roundtable on the Scaling Up Finance to support the energy transition in emerging markets and developing economies. The Assembly has before it a background document with the same title contained in A/15/BN/3. This Ministerial Roundtable will serve as a platform for discussing gaps in the current financing architecture to mobilize support from developed to developing countries and the reform needed for a just energy transition in light of the UAE consensus and the new collective quantified goal on climate finance. It will further identify policy reform and technical assistance partnerships to create an enabling environment and build institutional capacity in the energy and finance sectors and explore how to strengthen private investor offers to de-risk investments and attract capital. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to invite the Director General, Mr. Francesco Le Camera, to deliver his opening remarks. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished guests, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to address you here this afternoon at the Ministerial Roundtable on scaling up finance support, the energy transition in emerging and developing economies. As we convene today, we first must address a fundamental crisis in the global energy transition. The challenge of scaling up investment in clean energy systems is pressing, particularly for emerging markets and developing economies, which remain critically underfunded. IRENA, as the lead international governmental agency dedicated to renewable energy, is committed to facilitating the global transition by working alongside our members and partners to drive investment that will accelerate the energy transition. As a critical part of our programmatic mission, we are focused on unlocking the financing needed to scale clean energy systems, particularly in regions like Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and other developing economies, which remain critically underfunded despite the global increase in energy transition-related investments. The financial gap in these regions are not just a challenge, but a urgent priority. Closing these gaps will require a concerted effort to bring together international collaboration, innovative financial solutions, and country-led platforms that can direct support where it's most needed. Analysis from IRENA's flagship publication, World Energy Transition Outlook 2024, shows that cumulative energy sector investment will need to reach $47 trillion by 2030, on an average of $6.7 trillion each year globally between 2024 and 2030, to stay on track towards our tripling and doubling objective. The ambition of the Paris Agreement and the global commitment set by the UE Consensus COP28 towards tripling installed renewable capacity and doubling the rate of energy efficiency by 2030 is still achievable. However, it is only achievable if we mobilize the necessary resources and create the enabling environment for emerging markets and developing economy to scale renewable energy. ARENA remains dedicated to support our membership in project facilitation and various forms of technical assistance needed to accelerate renewable energy deployment and ensure that no region is left behind in the transition to clean energy. Through key partnership facilitated, supported, and endorsed by the agency such Energy Transition Accelerating Financing Platform, ETAF, the Accelerated Partnership for Renewable in Africa and in Central Asia, the Global Clean Power Alliance, and the COP29 new collective quantified goal of climate finance, we must ensure that finances is targeted to the most vulnerable population and that investment are de-risked to attract private capital. In one of the previous sessions concerning APRA, this topic has been really high in the agenda. Everyone is mentioning this as a condition to accelerate investment in Africa. We need to pour resources and expertise, ensuring a coordinated global effort to address energy financing challenges. Together, we must commit to rethinking financial flows, prioritize investment in underserved regions, and unlocking the full potential of public-private cooperation. Concerning the risk investment, the World Bank has launched, in fact, this initiative was already there, a new scheme for the risk investment that is in some way linked to the progress made on Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. We are working closely with them to make this apply to the project that has been presented, could be presented under APRA or under ETAF. So on that note, let's continue working together to achieve a sustainable net zero future that is equitable, inclusive, and prosperous for all. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion today. And back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Director General, for those very impressive remarks. I would like now to invite Her Excellency Honlisa Cummins, Minister of Energy and Business of Barbados, to deliver a keynote speech. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to express appreciation to IRENA for again hosting what has turned out to be a successful conference once again. We have a discussion ongoing today around the sustainability of financing, and it's very difficult over the course of 2 days and 3 days and to hear many member states and many partners share what the common challenges are, and in many instances to hear commonalities around what the issues are and make recommendations on what needs to be done. And so I want to take just a few moments to talk about new and innovative forms of financing and to use a recently completed Barbados example as a means of talking about what the known problems are and finding new solutions to them. Barbados just a few weeks ago, perhaps just towards the end of November, would have completed what would have been one of the very first and most innovative forms of financing globally and certainly in Barbados that we have had. And it was done with the collaboration of the global partners, many of them here, starting with the European Union, who have been friends and partners, the Inter-American Development Bank and the Global Climate Fund, and it was a debt for climate swap. And as we talk about the shared challenges around climate, the need for us to invest in the energy transition agenda, the need for us to triple and to scale up renewables and to finance those changes, innovative financing mechanisms like sustainability-linked loans, like the one that we just completed, debt for climate swap in the end of November, is an important part of the arsenal for countries sitting around the table. The importance also of development partners working hand in glove with countries who have identified what their priorities are. And my colleague and countryman from the UN, Mr. Hart, who I'm sure is going to speak shortly about national determined contributions. How do countries identify what their national determined contributions are? How are we going to set those targets? How are we going to finance them? And how are we going to work together with development institutions? And a sustainability-linked loan that I just spoke about, with about $150 million in guarantees from development partners, and then backed along with local currency loans, provided an opportunity for countries like Barbados to identify what our well thought out plans were, what our development objectives were, what our macro policies needed to be, and then to work together with an open-minded development community and a financially driven private sector to put the meat on those bones. So the first thing then needs to be innovative financing, but the second part of it needs to be an openness and a willingness of the development partners and the financial institutions to have country-led innovative solutions developed to allow for the resolution of the challenges that we're facing. And the third and the final element that I want, because I just have 3 minutes in my opening comments, and I want to make sure that the room is full, and I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to weigh into what I consider to be a super important debate. One of the other elements that I want to raise here is, and I raised it in the plenary earlier, in countries like ours, and I give the Barbados example deliberately, we have not had a difficulty mobilizing financing or having access to financing. In fact, it has been the opposite. We have seen the financing sector, the business community flooding to Barbados, one, because the level of ambition set by countries like Barbados has been extraordinarily high. Our national determined contributions has also been set very ambitiously. And so there is an investment opportunity. But there is also a philosophy to financing climate, to financing the energy transition that must go hand in glove with the transitioning and the financing of small island developing states with very little fiscal space and large competing development priorities on which expenditure is required. And so there has to be a discussion around the financial model, the financing model around power purchase agreements to finance the renewable energy transition. What are the conditions being determined for bankability of projects, and therefore what those sustainability financing mechanisms are going to treat to? And what are the tenures that we will have for financing? Are we available to have a conversation in a meaningful way around how long countries will have access to repay either loans or equity financing for projects? Short tenure projects simply do not work for countries like ours. We do need long-term money. We do need reasonable rates of return. We do need to be able to have investment rates or interest rates that are reasonable and that allow for countries to develop in a way that makes sense. And we do need to be able to have, just as we did with the sustainability investment loan with the European Union and others, to have international development partners willing to guarantee and to convert long tenor, high interest rates for long tenor, low interest rates backed by guarantees by our development partners. And those will be my opening remarks, and I hope that we can have a meaningful conversation as we go through the course of this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Extremely enlightening, and I'm sure there is so much comments that going to come from the floor based on those remarks. I would like now to invite my friend, Mr. Selwyn Hart, the Special Advisor to the Secretary General on Climate Action, United Nations, to deliver his keynote speech. Mr. Hart, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice President, my very good friend, and it's a pleasure to see you presiding over this meeting. I had a prepared statement, but given that my minister and former colleague, we sat next to each other as Foreign Service officers many years ago for a small island developing state, and she's tasked me now with the responsibility of speaking about the importance of the nationally determined contributions. But the minister is absolutely right. national ownership, country ownership is absolutely key, really, to send in that signal needed by both public and private investors. And we're really hoping that the NDC process, that this current round, in this current round of NDCs, countries will seize the opportunity of the NDC preparatory process, really to construct a process that's inclusive, that gathers the inputs of all segments of society and signals the ambition that each country intends to undertake. I'm from a developing country, and I know developing country Barbados, of course, that developing countries have traditionally under-promised internationally and over-delivered domestically. We traditionally don't want to put something on the table where we are not certain that the ambition will be met. And it's absolutely crucial that, yes, we don't want countries to put impossible goals and targets on the table, but we need to ensure that the bilateral partners and international financial institutions back ambition with the finance and technical support that countries need. So I encourage countries really, and our colleagues from UNDP, they're working in over 100 countries. The Secretary General has tasked UNDP to coordinate the entire UN system to help countries to develop high quality, high ambition, nationally determined contribution. But this ambition must be met with the finance and the technological support that countries need. And it will require innovation and creativity along the lines of what Minister Cummins explained. The reality is that in the developing world, low and middle income developing countries are spending on average about 24% and 13% respectively of the export revenues on debt. Low income countries are spending 24% and middle income developing countries 13% of their export revenues on servicing external debt. And let's place this into historical context. At the end of World War II, when Germany needed access to cheap finance to rebuild its economy, its export to debt service was capped at 5%. Everyone had to take a haircut, right? So we need a serious approach to addressing the debt challenges of developing countries, and many of the innovations that the minister outlined: longer tenures, new approaches to risk, the innovative use of guarantees. These instruments, we already have these instruments at our disposal, and they need to be deployed at the pace and scale needed. We are in a crisis. Everyone agrees that we are in an existential climate crisis, and we need these instruments to be deployed widely at pace and at scale. And finally, the issue of fragmentation. There is too much fragmentation. And while all of you might not agree with the Just Energy Transition Partnerships approach, Secretary General has been supportive of this model. It is not perfect. It shows the complexity of the energy transition. But this is the type of innovation, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships and the country platforms. We need a space really to coordinate external partners around a country-owned plan, a country-owned strategy. Platforms that will coordinate different financial actors who will bring different things to the table. Within that mix, it's just not only private finance if you're a highly indebted country. You need risk-bearing cheap capital in order to de-risk some of these investments. So how can we create these platforms that are country-owned? They must be country-owned and country-led, but we need to end the fragmentation and a duplication and bring different financial actors to the table. So I dispense with my prepared speech and followed the guidance of my minister. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Silwan. That was really useful, and I guess it's easy, takes us to hear from the developed country, the developed world. So I would like to invite Ms. Detty Jorgensen, Director General of Energy at the EU Commission, to deliver her speech. Ms. Jorgensen.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Vice Chair, and very good to see you here again. Others have made Minister Cummins and the UN Secretary General's Climate Advisor Selwyn have made very pertinent comments, and so I will also leave aside what I plan to say and try to complement that. Indeed, from a European perspective, how do we go about it? And we know that the investment, the financing needed for emerging markets and developing economies between now and 2030 to reach tripling of renewable energy, doubling of energy efficiency, but also beyond 2030 to continue that transition and that access to energy. We know the amounts are significant, and we know that we have useful tools already, but we're also going to need to look at developing those and creating more innovative instruments to get the funding that is needed. Among the tools, we have green bonds, guarantees for power purchasing agreements, public-private partnerships, and technical assistance. So there's a lot there to draw from. We in the European Union are the largest donor by quite some measure, the European Union and the 27 member states. Our global gateway alone will make available €300 billion between now and 2027. That is really targeted at energy projects, energy infrastructure, and the energy transition. But we also know that this is not going to be public budgets, public money that is going to make the transition. It is not possible, and there is a very good business case. We need private investors, we need the private sector to be part of this change, and we need, of course, the multilateral development banks and others to help de-risk and to help create the guarantee and the right framework for making it happen. The enabling framework is what we see in the European Union, and what has helped us to create a strong regulatory framework, clear targets, a clear pathway. And so, as Selwyn has said, the NDCs will be important. There will be investment plans that can help provide the certainty and clarity around the direction and what is needed to help lower the risk of investments and thereby lower the cost of the capital that is necessary. What we have done from the European side so far, what we have been working on is an international platform on sustainable finance as one of the elements that we can work with others to mobilize private capital for the energy transition. We're building partnerships, critical raw materials partnerships, clean trade investment partnerships. So really to help work as closely as possible with partners, again, knowing that that cooperation is the only way that we can make the change that we need to happen, and the only way that we can bring in the capital that is needed for part of the transition and access to energy. So if there's one word I would leave, it is partnerships and cooperation. Well, that's two words, partnerships and cooperation, because without that, it is not going to work, or we're going to pay too high a price for the capital and the investments that are needed. A couple of thoughts on the more innovative aspects of financing and what more can be done building on the instruments we have already. I mentioned green bonds. We have set up a global green bond initiative really to try to build more sustainable finance ecosystems. We obviously have the advantage of doing it, building on what we already have existing in the European Union, but we see scope for developing that further globally and working with partners, and see that as a necessary part again of building the financing. We need to further strengthen our de-risking tools. We need guarantees, or we need insurance to allow investments to take place also when the risk is higher. And in terms of de-risking, we need to make sure that we do not get the risk perception wrong. A wrong risk perception is going to increase the cost of capital significantly, and I think many countries present here today see that. So if we can work together to get a more precise risk assessment, risk perception, that should help capital and financing, and doing that at a lower cost. And for all of that, of course, we need to work around technical assistance, having the right governance, the right infrastructure, and the right local capacity in emerging markets and developing economies. And again, that is not only the right the governance and skills and capacity for building the energy systems. It really is being part fully of that value chain and drawing on all the local capacity, the local opportunities for growth and development that are there, whether that comes from critical minerals and processing or technologies or other aspects of the value chain. So I think important to look at energy as the entire system, not just the generation or the deployment, but everything and all the opportunities that are linked to that globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's really, I guess it's an amazing movement as we transition into the next segment of the session, which is the roundtable. And we already heard from extremely insightful leaders, and so we understand the challenges very well. We understand seems the opportunities, and I guess the discussion is going to help us to hear insights from thought leaders and high-level panelists and speakers. I'll be very happy to hand over to Her Excellency, Ms. Rachel Kite, the United Kingdom Special Representative for Climate, as she moderates the session. So I do look forward for the discussion, and I would hand over to Ms. Kite to take us through this conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. So with an eye on the clock, I'm not going to restate the problem or the challenges in front of us. What I hope we can do in this session is focus in on how we are going to work together going forward to not just adore the problem, but to start to apply focused solutions and ways of working together around the diagnosed blockages to why finance is not flowing into emerging markets and developing economies. We've heard from Barbados, and Barbados, of course, together with others, have really successfully, I think, moved us to the point where we know we need to reset how some of the international system sees this problem. So again, rather than all sort of saying that we agree with Bridgetown, we now have to implement it. We've heard from the Honourable Assistant Secretary General that, and Liverpool supporter, so he's a good guy, really. We've heard from Mr. Hart that one of the problems that we have to fix 10 years after Paris, 15 years after the creation of IRENA, is that countries that have ambition and countries that know what they want to do have to be rewarded in real time by the partnership with the international community and bringing the capital stack to those countries in the right way. And we've heard from my colleague, the Director General of the European Commission, that there are pieces of data that we need to reveal to the private sector in particular, so that we really fully understand what the risks, the real risks are, manageable risks, right? So that we can bring down the cost of capital and bring the capital stack to bear. I represent a government that was elected 6 months ago on a mandate to put climate and nature at the heart of its foreign policy, to deliver the energy transition for British people, and to engage with the rest of the world in a pragmatic way as an international extension of the domestic delivery of our own energy transition. The theory of change being that while we might not any longer be one of the largest emitters, although historically very significant in that, we can't deliver energy security, affordable and reliable energy for the British people unless we are working as a partner pragmatically with the rest of the world. So I'm pleased to moderate this session. I won't go into much more detail other than to say that the point on fragmentation is extremely important. And so I think so, both with the new European Union sort of initiative and with the Global Clean Power Alliance, which is not another silo or another organization, but a way of working that we launched at the G20 together with Brazil. What we're trying to do is find ways to convene differently in pursuit of a solution to a particular problem, and bringing political pressure to bear, especially from those countries that are vanguard countries that are aligned around net zero. And so we hope that we can be a partner in maybe doing things different together in order to get to the heart of the problem. Now, we are already over time. I know that you're all focused on solutions, and so you'll find it very easy to speak for 4 minutes or less. And I'm looking forward to this display of international coordinated leadership. I will try to be gentle with you, but I hope that you can respect that. The first round of interventions come from ministers and from countries, and then we will move into a round of interventions from non-state actors. Non-state actors, it's tough, but I'm going to probably ask you to speak for less than 4 minutes, but I'll clarify that when we get to you. But I'm going to start now by asking, please, my colleague from Spain to intervene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Less than 4 minutes, I hope. 4 messages in that time. Firstly, obviously, as part of the European Union as well, Spain's ongoing commitment to international climate finance. At COP29 in Baku, our Prime Minister was pleased to announce that Spain had anticipated in 2 years our targets for international climate finance exceeding 1.4 billion euros of climate financing, as I was saying, 2 years ahead of schedule. And that has been done by doubling our contributions to multilateral and bilateral official development aid, by including contributions from different ministries. Climate change financing in Spain is mainstreamed into different responsibilities, and also orienting support for investment activities. So Spain's international support on capital and quasi-capital, on credit and insurance, is becoming climate mainstreamed and therefore prioritizing sustainable projects against fossil fuel projects. So that's the first message. Second message, making sure that other forms of support are readily available. So technology transfer, capacity building, technical collaboration in developing public policies to make possible what my colleague from Barbados was explaining. Ambition should be rewarded. Ambition should attract investment because it means there's scope for investment. But on my third point, we need to, and my colleagues have spoken about it already, we need to incorporate the private sector more and better. And that is to do with carbon markets and guarantees. You all right? Okay, sorry. But a lot of it comes down to ensuring that things are valued in the right way. And by this I mean risk perception, understanding what the risk perception, what the risk modeling actually is. The more we reduce the distance between risk perception and actual risk, the better we will do, the more efficient the solutions are going to be. And that can mean literally sitting down, opening up the Excel spreadsheet and looking at the actual risk modeling. We've actually done that, not being a developing country ourselves, but we've actually done that in Spain, sitting down with investors, sort of an open book policy. And we've actually seen that some of the perceived risks, some of the variables in that Excel spreadsheet do not necessarily reflect the reality of the risks. And as soon as you actually explain policies or you explain the reality of regulation, a lot of that risk suddenly goes away. So if billions of euros are being spent because of the wrong variable in the spreadsheet, we're doing something wrong. So sitting down and actually understanding risk in a similar way is important. There's an issue of co-responsibility in the private sector, as I was saying, valuing things appropriately and valuing things in the right timescales as well. My colleagues from Barbados were talking about the necessity for long-term money. The extreme of that is, of course, the tragedy of the commons of trying to extract value in a plus 1.5 or plus 2 degrees world. And what happens to shareholders in that scenario? This IRENA General Assembly is in the context of the Los Angeles wildfires, deaths already happening there. The COP was opening in the context of the Valencia floods in Spain, deaths were happening there. And that obviously affects value as well. So we need to think in the bigger, broader context. And finally, to finish off, invite you all obviously to the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development that is going to happen in Spain, in Sevilla. In the middle of the summer in Sevilla, so bring light clothing. But I think it's a good opportunity for everyone to visit Spain, visit Andalusia as well, a region, a country that have made renewable energy an opportunity for industrialization, for jobs, for a positive agenda. So I think matching, obviously, the important discussions around international financing, but seeing the reality of the opportunity around renewable energy in the region, in Spain, is hopefully going to be inspiring and moving for the sort of commitments that we do need at the international level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think that the publication of the GEMS database last year is already having an impact, a positive impact, I think, on the ability to see what is really the the performance of investments through development finance. And I think more and more of this is really important. So this question of perceived risk and real risk is coming up again and again already. With that, I'd like to now ask a representative from Tanzania, Excellency from Tanzania, to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. A very good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to present what I have from the government of Tanzania. And what we are really saying that the government of Tanzania is implementing various renewable energy projects via the solar, wind, and geothermal that exist in the country. And all these initiatives are done through the Ministry of Energy, to which I belong, and are implemented by the TANESCO and REA, are the key government agencies. And typically, the renewable energy projects are implemented via unsolicited bidding process where individual companies and organizations submit the application for expression of interest to TANESCO for appraisal before negotiation and of course further action. And the investing modality, there are three options which are available on the ground right now. The first one, that the developer is supposed to submit a project proposal or other expression of interest to the specific area of investment. And number two, the developer acquiring potential investment areas from the TANESCO. We have got a number of studies that have been done by the TANESCO, so you can pick one of them and see where exactly fit in very well. And the third one, getting in touch with the developers who own potentials but failed to develop due to several reasons, including those have been mentioned here by participants in this particular gathering. And what we are really saying that the current power master plan in Tanzania, that we envisage that the renewable energy is going to contribute about 8,200 megawatts by the year 2044. So the future is really very, very good. And in doing so, we believe that the private sector investment is needed to keep up with the growing demand for infrastructure due to population growth. And our 5-year development plan, which runs from 2021 up to 2026, clearly highlight the use of public-private partnerships to get private, companies involved in funding and the building infrastructure. And this, of course, approach is going to help us to speed development and ensures better services while easing the finance drain on the government. If you are a potential investor, banker, investment company, you'll find clear information on public-private partnership investment opportunities which are available in the country, the regulatory environment, and the Tanzania stable investment climate. So this is all what I say. But before I conclude my presentation, I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words about the energy mission, the Mission 300 Energy Summit, which is going to take place in Dar es Salaam between 27 and 28 January 2025. What we're saying, this is a landmark gathering, which is basically focusing on accelerating energy access across the Africa continent. And the summit, which is going to be held in Dar es Salaam about 2 weeks from now, is meant to increase access to 300 million people in sub-Saharan Africa to increase access to electricity. That is number one. But number two, to ensure that the rate of renewable energy share is doubled in 5 years between 2025 and 2030. But again, the summit will look at how we can increase the penetration of clean cooking in Africa. And lastly, but not least, the increase in participation of private sector in energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa. And more than 15 head of states Governments not from different countries in Africa have confirmed their participation. Development partners like World Bank, Africa Development Bank, and energy stakeholder. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much, and good luck with the summit in 2 weeks' time. It's an important gathering in a year where we can't afford to lose momentum. Next to directly in front of me, the Minister from the Philippines, please.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, distinguished guests, good afternoon. The Philippine government has policies on renewable portfolio standards, green energy auction, green energy option. We opened the renewable energy market last year, and this has encouraged renewable energy investments in the country. In fact, the Bloomberg NEF ranked the Philippines second last year in terms of most attractive emerging market for renewable energy investments. This is all nice and good, but the question at the end of the day is, how much can our people afford in paying for renewable energy electricity? And these are the things that we would like the financing of the transition to address. First, the risk, the energy transition for the emerging markets and developing economies. For example, the Asian Development Bank is giving a loan to the Philippines for a de-risking facility for geothermal exploration. Second, they are also giving us a way to fund our transmission because at the end of the day, you need all these transmission lines to connect the renewable energy to the demand side. So we need good financing for de-risking the energy transition. Second, we need to lower the cost of capital for renewable energy developers. In the Philippines, because private sector are the ones driving the energy sector, we need to find a way for multilateral development partners to fund the private sector, the renewable energy developers, with good or lower cost of capital. So that's the second. And the third is for the Philippines, we have decided that our energy transition needs to be able to connect the retirement of our coal plants with the build-up of renewable energy. Here's the thing, 60% of our electricity is based on coal. Coal is base load. You cannot replace it with a solar power plant that is intermittent. So you have a solar power plant and possibly a battery in order to become somewhat an intermediate or base load to replace the coal. But coal in the Philippines, electricity is 3 pesos 50 centavos per kilowatt hour. Solar is 4.50. If you add a battery, it goes up to about 7 to 8 pesos per kilowatt hour. So how do you make up the difference between the original coal-based load and the renewable energy plus energy storage system? We would like to suggest that maybe it is possible to use transition credits to make up the difference between the cost of the old coal and the new RE plus ESS. And we are hoping that maybe international climate financing would be able to help countries like the Philippines do our energy transition from coal to RE plus ESS and figure out how to make transition credits pay for the difference between the price of electricity with coal versus renewable energy plus energy storage system. These are the kinds of financing that we think must be scaled up for the EMDEs, because at the end of the day, in order for energy transition to be just, people like us in the Philippines should be able to afford the electricity of renewable energy. But in order for that to happen, we hope our partners across this table would be able to address that financing gap. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you've raised two fundamental issues. One is innovation in the way in which we use climate finance, what we can use it for, and the second is the sequencing. Right, we can't phase out of something unless we can provide the energy that people need from cleaner sources. With that, I ask Brazil for their intervention, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here talking on behalf of the Brazilian government and particularly on behalf of the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Brazil. We are really keen to have this conversation, especially because this was one of the key topics that we have brought to the 20th biggest economy of the world under the G20 presidency of Brazil. As we see the access to financing as a key need for countries to address their energy transitions. And as a result of this process, we have counted with the support with many different international organizations such as the International Energy Agency and the IRENA as well. And we could see that we still have many inequalities in the sources. The financing are very much concentrated in some geographies, and this needs to change. Thinking about the developing countries, we are talking about a huge gap. And as a proposition from the Brazilian presidency under the G20 last year, we had at the ministerial meeting by October in Foz do Iguaçu, approved the creation of a global coalition for energy planning, knowing that energy planning can be an enabler for de-risking investments, financing, and many other aspects that might be required for many different countries to address their energy needs and also to prepare ambitious goals in terms of their own NDCs. Talking about the Brazilian experience in this sense, we come up with a very positive experience in this regard. In 2015, when we signed the Paris Agreement, we were talking about electricity mix all composed by 74% of renewables, which was already a great number. But we worked hard during the past decade, and we have now presented in Baku last year our new NDCs, and we are really proud to say that we were capable of achieving 89% of renewables in our electricity mix, and we want to do more by bringing new technologies into our power mix and by also adding transmission capacity so that we can reinforce our national grid to guarantee that this energy can go to all parts of our country with the lower cost possible to all Brazilians. But we know that this is an easy way to be done. We needed a lot of support. We needed energy planning, very strong energy planning to do so. And our view is that the coalition should be a way and a tool for developing countries to have the ownership of the process. It is a network of collaboration and cooperation that is going to be dedicated to support developing countries. Brazil is going to be the first round of presidency of the coalition, and we invite many different stakeholders, countries, financial institutions, international organizations to join forces with us, because we do believe that we can only move forward by having a strong cooperation to make it happen. We know that we are going to have a quite intense year in 2025, knowing that COP30 represents a huge responsibility for us, and you can count on Brazil's commitment to do the difference this year, and we count on you to help us in this regard. Talking about the coalition, we are also expecting to host a special event in Brazil by June, the first week of June, which is going to be a landmark of the launch of the coalition so that we can pave the way and bring up the activities throughout this year and the next one. We believe that we need the coalition to promote transparent and effective energy planning, to facilitate knowledge exchange and capacity building. We need to catalyze investments through enabling environments, knowing that each country will have a different context and that we can learn a lot with each other, to encourage national ownership and inclusive participation in the decision-making processes, and also to cooperate and leverage the existing initiatives and partnerships such as the long-term energy scenario under the IRENA and many other efforts that we know that multilateral banks are already developing and other international organizations as well. We count on you, and thank you so much once again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership of the G20 last year, for the handover to South Africa, and now also to congratulations for the upper range of your NDC, which is suitably ambitious. And if more countries can do what Brazil's been able to do, then we will be in a stronger position. I hand now to Norway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm going to try to be briefer because by and large, my colleagues have already outlined the problem, and I think we also know the solutions, and now we need to find what I call the transaction advisors that can develop the effective solutions to address the problem and sort of make the connect between the toolboxes that we have at hand and the problem that we are set up to address here. It's quite clear that we are not doing enough, and we need to scale up all of our efforts across the board. So let me make three sort of short points building on some comments already made my colleagues. For us, it's important that we look into how we can boost all sources of finance. There are lots of sources out there that are not really working effectively together today, that we need to make sure that we are tapping into. Of course, we're mentioning the EMDEs. You have IMF. One group that has not been highlighted so far is the development finance institutions that I would at least pitch into this, because our DFIs, they are actually well equipped to work with private sector, which has been a call from many of my colleagues. Secondly, I think for us, it's always an issue that we are bringing up. It's domestic resource mobilization, and that's part of national ownership, Selvin, to build on your comment and also the way of backing up ambition, because we need to make sure that countries actually implement a mix of policies to raise domestic revenues, boost taxation. I'm always saying, come to Norway, I'll teach you how to tax people, because we are really good at doing that. We are almost world champions, even though I think Denmark is better than us. Sorry to say that. And we also need to look into cost-effective tariffs. We need to look into how we can not necessarily phase out subsidies, but maybe redirect subsidies, because it's really difficult. It's easy to say phasing out subsidies, but having to do it, then you are in political trouble. But if we can redirect it, I think, to the good things rather than the bad things. And then, which has already been brought up by colleagues, carbon taxation. So, of course, a key requisite underpinning this is policy certainty and stability. And I think from Barbados, you highlighted that if you have that in place, also money will start flowing. I would also second what Selvin saying, we need to avoid fragmentation, because we are better at creating new initiatives and acronyms that we are at delivering. So I think we are all guilty here. I'm not blaming anyone, because that's a part of our job is actually to establish new initiative. But I think we need to now focus on partnerships and initiatives that deliver and rally around this, because we are all faced with a situation that we have scarce resources and we have to use them as efficiently as possible. Finally, I think one key issue that I would just like to throw in, I think we need more equity and people, investors that are willing to risk his or her money and getting into the business area. I think we are talking about de-risking, but we look at the tail end of de-risking and often talking about guarantees. But if you don't have the guys that are willing to risk his or her capital, we are not going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think focusing us in even more on what needs to be done. And now I hand over to my colleague, the Ambassador of the UK, to the UAE.
Thank you. As has been said by others already, the scale and urgency of the challenge we face is huge. We have to increase by sixfold in the next less than a decade the funding available to emerging markets and developing economies. We must address the many barriers at the global and country level blocking the financial flow. And, as our colleague from the European Commission has said, partner and collaborate to do that. That's why the UK government launched the Global Clean Power Alliance at the G20 last year. At the international level, we need to reduce the cost of capital, for example, improving clean energy project level data to close the gap between perceived and actual project risk. We need to unblock public finance flowing into critical grid projects, including by adoption of the principles recently adopted through the Green Grids Initiative. We need to complete the work started at COP26 in Glasgow in delivering the global transition of all forms of public finance out of fossil fuels and into clean energy, as promoted by the Clean Energy Transition Partnership. We need to free up more public finance to invest through, for example, mainstreaming originator distributed style mechanisms and platforms across the international climate finance architecture, such as the CIF capital market mechanism announced at COP29, which has the potential to mobilize $75 billion in climate finance over the next 10 years through selling and reinvesting bonds sold on the London Stock Exchange. And we need to target and innovate with the use of limited concessional finance where it's most needed to de-risk the private investment. But this is the country level, where many of the biggest and most challenging barriers is at the country level where the biggest barriers are found. Each context is different, so we need to be tailoring solutions. For example, as we heard yesterday, we need to provide support for energy planning to create long-term energy strategies and investment plans. We need to build attractive investment and business environments, including reforming energy markets to ensure fair and effective pricing. We need to build vital institutional capacity across energy policymakers, regulators, and utilities. And we need to mobilize more support to help reform and scale the capacity of domestic financial markets to avoid currency risk in the process. Finally, while we are recognizing the excellent work of many delivery partners, organizations, and initiatives, including IRENA, we believe we must find new ways to work together. This means, for example, coordinating, consolidating, and simplifying access to fragmented financial and technical assistance offers, pooling resources and aligning the many multilateral and bilateral programs, mobilizing task teams behind critical infrastructure and transformation projects, working in public-private partnerships, and reinforcing support for the development of clean energy components of nationally owned country platforms, like the new Brazilian investment platform. This is both urgent and complex, cutting across the work of energy, development, and finance ministers. That's why UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, jointly with Brazil's President Lula da Silva, launched the Global Clean Power Alliance at the G20 at Rio last year. The GCPA is not intended to be a new institutional or lasting initiative to an already crowded set of initiatives. Rather, it's intended to be a time-bound political campaign to use the weight of high ambition countries to harness that ambition and reinforce, coordinate, and plug gaps, working with and through existing initiatives and organizations. We're very keen to hear from all countries and partners as we work with Brazil and others to finalize the priorities over the coming months, ahead of the World Bank spring meetings and the IEA Energy Security Summit. So I'm very grateful to IRENA for their support for this work and providing this opportunity to raise it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we're hearing, repeatedly that we know that this is the time to stop hand-wringing around defragmentation and to actually find the political courage to do that. So I think that these are the kinds of places where we can get down to the how to do that. But it is urgent, as was said. So now to Singapore, please.
Thank you, Rachel. Very good afternoon. It's a pleasure for Singapore to join this discussion. Now, we have heard from speakers today that global investments in renewable energy capacity and energy efficiency still fall short of the US $31.5 trillion needed each year until 2030. The urgency in meeting the investment gap is keenly felt in Southeast Asia. While the region is blessed with an abundance of renewable energy potential, much of these remains untapped. According to IRENA, Southeast Asia requires an estimated $200 billion per year in renewable energy and energy efficiency measures by 2030. Now, how can we address these financing gaps? First, we must strengthen investments in infrastructure such as overland and subsea cables, which is key to de-risk and improve the commercial viability of renewable energy projects. Last year, Singapore and the United States completed the first phase of a joint feasibility studies on regional energy connectivity. The study highlighted that cable costs are estimated to be at least $1.2 billion for every 500 kilometers. While these investments are massive, an interconnected region can bring about significant social and economic benefits. In Southeast Asia, an interconnected grid can generate $2 billion in annual R&D investment and as many as 9,000 direct jobs annually. This is why we have been accelerating our efforts towards an ASEAN power grid. Singapore has been working with neighboring countries and like-minded partners to co-create an ecosystem for cross-border electricity trading. ASEAN is working towards the framework for subsea power cables. The next phase of the Singapore-US feasibility studies will also focus on the legal and governance, as well as the financing and investment models needed for large-scale cross-border power trade in Southeast Asia. Beyond investing in infrastructure, we must enhance public-private partnerships to catalyze investments in clean energy projects. The transition towards net zero will require massive amounts of investments, as pointed out by many speakers here, and government funding alone will be insufficient. According to the IMF, the private sector will have to supply up to 90% of the capital that is needed annually by emerging market and developing economies to reach net zero by 2050. In response to this, Singapore launched the Financing Asia's Transition Partnership FAST-P, a finance platform that aims to mobilize up to $5 billion of capital for green and transition projects in Asia. At COP29, Singapore pledged up to $500 million to crowd in other concessional capital from public, private, and philanthropic sources of an equal amount. This will catalyze a much larger amount of private capital to support green and transition projects in Asia. We have also established a future energy fund with an initial injection of Singapore $5 billion to catalyze investments in low-carbon energy infrastructure that faces significant commercial risks. While the energy transition will be complex and challenging, there are many opportunities for us to co-create new solutions together. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. I think it's very important that you brought the sort of issues of scale and then how to scale into this conversation, including some of the innovation and the new forms of revenue that can be generated. And obviously, Singapore is playing an important role with many new initiatives and also an important role to play in the carbon markets. With that, thank you. We go to the Dominican Republic. And just before my colleague from the Dominican Republic speaks, I realise that we are over time. We started late. We are the only thing in the way of ourselves and dinner. So I know that you've all got strong stomachs, otherwise you wouldn't be working on this issue. And so we will try to move forward with the pace, but we are running over schedule, and I beg your indulgence. Dominican Republic, please.
Thank you, Her Excellency. We are very quick. Well, we meet today on this important table to address one of the most pressing challenges that we face in countries like the Dominican Republic. As you may know, we share the island with Haiti. Dominican Republic is our neighbor, Barbados and Jamaica. We have the second island in the Caribbean. We as a country have to increase. So we have the goal to increase by 30% of the renewable energy by 2030. In the light of the commitment under the Declaration of Principle signed by the Climate Action Summit in 2019. To achieve this goal, we need finance to support the energy transition, especially when the grid, on the transmission grid, we don't have too much water like countries in Central America and South America. So we need to put our radiation especially in the north area. But we need support for the grid, transmission grid. In market like the Dominican Republic, we have insufficient local capital market to finance a new project. So we call for action to promote the change of technology, to establish accessible finance mechanism for project. Yeah, because, like I said, we have the goal by 30% in 2030. So it's a huge goal for the Dominican Republic. We need to accelerate the energy transition in our country. We call for the multilateral agency to support the country like the Dominican Republic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I hand the floor to Colombia.
Thank you, Excellency. Excellencies, distinguished delegates. The agreement reached in the energy sector under the global stocktake present a key milestones for the world to advance toward the climate goals established in the Paris Agreement. However, let us be clear. While these goals are necessary, they do not guarantee their own implementation. The global stocktake set ambitious targets such as tripling renewable energy capacity, double energy efficiency, and reducing methane emissions. However, the developing countries like Colombia, achieving these goals require financial and technological resources that must come from the international community. A clear example is the transition toward phasing out fossil fuels in energy systems, as highlighted in the global stocktake. For Colombia, a country highly dependent on fossil fuels, this transition must be just, orderly, and equitable. However, when we take concrete steps in this direction, we face significant challenges. We are penalized by the international financing system with restriction or adverse conditions. We face legal challenges from industries unwilling to take an active role in the energy transition. These challenges not only impact Colombia's climate ambition, but also limit our capacity for action. Unfortunately, critical issues like these are not being addressed in the formal discussions at COP30, despite being essential to achieving the negotiation objectives. Nevertheless, Colombia has made progress in implementing a roadmap for just energy transition, which incorporates territorial, ethnic, and gender perspective to ensure an inclusive and sustainable transition. This effort is complemented by concrete initiatives such as green hydrogen, offshore wind energy, active international participation, where Colombia leads collaborative framework on offshore renewables alongside Denmark and is member of the initiatives such as the Powering Past Coal Alliance and the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, reaffirming our commitment to the global energy transition. These actions reflect the commitment of the Colombian government, but also underscore the urgent need for strong support for the international financial system. Therefore, I make an urgent call for this assembly to establish a fair financial targets that reflect historical and current contributions to climate change, simplify access to final resources so that developing countries can act with the speed demanded by the climate crisis, promote innovative financial mechanisms such as risk guarantees and blended finances, to attract private capital and mitigate the risk. Excellencies, achieve the goals of the
and then have the
Thank you.
Yeah.
Accept that. The second point I need to highlight is a partnership. For the emerging and developing country, we need partnerships that improve the institutional capacity to plan for ourselves. And this institutional capacity need to be based on real gap analysis to make the institution ready for energy transition, especially to accepting more renewable energy and also to adopting energy efficiency to be part of the transition tools. And of course, we need to have another form of energy transformation beyond electricity. In Africa, we have 600 million without access to the electricity. But in the same time, we have 1 billion without access to the clean cooking facility and fuels. So solving the energy, the electricity problem is not solving our Africa situation. And especially, we need energy not only for just lighting, we need energy for industrialization, for creating jobs, for economy development. And the reason we think that we need to think energy transformation beyond electricity. The second or the third point I need to highlight, I think highlighted in many cases, is this the cost of finance. Africa is still paying 3 to 4 times the cost of finance. Now we are talking about M300. And the cost of this M300, if it is in Germany, can electrify 1.2 billion or 1.8 billion. So it is not fair for Africa to pay this cost, and we need Africa to have an energy transition similar to others. And I think in many occasions, the African leaders call for this global financial restructuring to be just so that Africa can be in the same speed with others. The fourth point I need also to highlight the renewable energy supply chain. We need really for emerging economy to enable them to be part of manufacturing of renewable energy technology, innovation, and research. And I think this is very important. And the last point I need to highlight, maybe we need to have a global call to process and manufacture this critical mineral in the countries that they are produced. This will ensure that we're creating jobs, we're creating finance to the countries that they can be part of the energy transition. And without that, I think we cannot go far. I think of the time, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. And now to the IEA, please.
Thank you. Briefly, just a few months ago, the IEA released the Clean Energy Investment Roadmap in support of the Brazil's G20 presidency, outlining how to scale financing in the emerging and developing economies. So these markets face a growing imbalance, despite representing 2/3 of the world's population, emerging developing economies outside of China accounted for only 15% of the global clean energy investments in 2023. So this is far below what's needed to meet the global climate Paris Agreement goals. So clean energy investment in those emerging and the developing economies will need to increase more than 6 times by 2035. The main barrier to accelerating the investment in these countries is the high cost of capital. So to bridge this gap, our clean energy investment roadmap outlines concrete actions that the governments, industry, and partners must take over the next decade in 3 key areas. The first set of actions is the capacity building for national energy policy planning. National strategies should align with multiple development goals: energy security, industrialization, just energy transitions, and the climate protection. The second area is data. So improving the availability and the reliability of financial and energy data in those regions is critical to reduce perceived risks and lower capital costs. And finally, the largest set of actions focus on the interventions that help clean energy projects reach financial close for 3 investment categories. The first one is the privately led investments. Actually, 40% of the financing needed by 2035 can come from the privately led investments, particularly in established markets and the mature technologies. But second, yet the majority, around half, will be from facilitated interventions for mature technologies in new markets where the de-risking is needed to support the projects. And in those areas, what we need is, for instance, at least quadrupling concessional finance for grids and expanding the dedicated lending for buildings. And third, finally, publicly driven investments account for the remainder and should be used in high-risk countries or for nascent technologies such as the CCUS. And these actions will not only help achieve climate goals, but also ensure just orderly transitions to a secure, reliable, and affordable energy systems. So I would like to thanks to the arena for convening this roundtable, and IEA stands ready to collaborate with relevant governments, institutions on this very important matter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So if I could just remind the speakers of trying to get to 2 minutes, that would be very helpful. So the OECD, please.
Thank you, and I'll try to keep my intervention very brief. To say, first of all, that the OECD has been working on the issue of bringing finance both to emerging and developing countries, and also tracking finance from our member countries to make sure that the finance is aligned with climate action, and we've been doing so for over a decade now. And I would like to focus my intervention on one priority area, and to highlight the role of local financial system and capital markets. Mobilizing long-term affordable local currency dominated finance for clean energy is critical. It is not sustainable for public power or utilities to bear increasing foreign exchange risk worth billions, and similarly, energy consumers with local currency revenues cannot take on excessive hard currency liabilities. And to address this issue and to address this challenge, let me stress very shortly 4 key priorities. First, it's important to facilitate the access to climate and clean energy funds for local financial institutions, including in local currency. Second, provide technical assistance and capacity building to local financial institutions, technical financial regulators and supervisors and policymakers. Third, ensuring concessional finance targets for sectors that are new to a country, to the country, and need support to kickstart, with a clear plan to move to commercial financing as soon as they mature. And lastly, working with partner governments in creating policy frameworks and strengthening macroeconomic conditions that are conducive to needed levels of investments. And here we're at the OECD stand ready to work with the emerging and developing economies to create these enabling conditions to attract financing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for raising such a fundamental issue as access to local currency. Something that sort of bedeviled development finance for a long time, but now becomes absolutely critical on the critical path to an energy transition. I now move to OFID, to the OPEC fund, please.
Thank you very much for inviting us today. I will be very brief. The OPEC fund has developed a comprehensive strategy to support energy transition. It's focused on three main points. One is to support, build the capacities of countries in energy transition planning and also integrated energy access. And supporting also coordination process at the country level. This is to echo what I heard earlier about fragmentation and the need to have country platforms, country-driven platforms. We have recently approved funding, technical assistance to Sierra Leone for that purpose. And the second point is probably you are trying to earmark to increase the funding for transformational projects that would tackle the issues of energy transition, energy access, and climate. And third, but not last but not least, is probably to foster more innovative and non-exclusive partnerships. We're working closely with other DFIs, but also are trying to engage with a wide range of partners, from UN agencies to civil society. We have joined the platforms like ETAF 2 years ago, and most recently with the Asian Development Bank. We have launched the Nature Solution Finance Hub, which is also geared towards innovation, trying to develop innovative solutions to address the challenges of energy transition and climate. Of course, as a development finance institution, we're looking also into deploying more resources through blended finance mechanisms jointly with other DFIs and partners. And perhaps I'd like to emphasize, and this is also to echo what I've heard from other partners, the importance of supporting technology transfers, right, to countries, particularly in Africa, who do not necessarily have the capacity to invest, to develop their own industries, to develop their own value chains, and in sectors that are critical to a successful energy transition. Thank you, Mrs. Chair. I will pause here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think this point, which has been made by others as well, about mobilising the finance behind the sectors which will have to deliver their transitions in order to meet the ambition in NDC, is very important. To UNDP, please.
It will be less than a minute. Three main points. The first point is what Minister Kamen mentioned, is how we can reduce the cost of capital. We have developed mechanism on de-risking, of course, policy de-risking, financial de-risking, but one element which is very important on your side, on the small island developing states, is the use of the multidimensional vulnerability index that was just adopted. And this is one of the key instruments for you for reducing the cost of financing. The second element, which is also as important, you mentioned also that finance exists, and my friend Hans Olaf said we need equities, we need private sector, but for that we need to have a pipeline of bankable projects. And this is where UNDP is investing with the Italian government. Blended finance, financial solutions lab that we have developed in Cuba, for example, exists for reducing the cost. The second element, which is important, is how we can streamline international support through strategic alliances. Mission 300 is an important initiative, new initiative, but there are also initiatives that, if they come all together, we can really have an impact. the Africa Mini Grid program, where you have 65 billion investment opportunities that can connect more than 265 million people. You have the last initiative of the Italian presidency of G7, Energy for Growth. Yes. I re-insist what ASG said about the NDCs as UNDP. We work with ARENA, we work with all the key actors. And the third point, I insist a lot on the finance part, which is the triptych of AI, digital, and data. Very important that they can identify investment opportunities in a very precise way and reduce the cost of financing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The climate champions.
Madam Chair, on behalf of the UN High-Level Champions, I would like to intervene. One of the most important priorities to scale up climate clean energy investment, as per us, is about the cost of capital. We see that there's a dichotomy. There's a dichotomy because EMDEs and LICs, they require, one, energy access. Second, the supply of renewable energy is much higher in these countries as compared to some other countries. The third, the growing energy demand is another point, which is in factor of these EMDs and LICs. But on the other hand, the cost of capital is at least 3 to 5% higher, and we heard that in Africa it's about 3 to 4 times higher. The second thing is that concessionary finance, only about 11% of total climate finance is concessionary. The rest is given at market rates. And the third is this increases the fiscal risks because interest expense as a percentage of government expenditure is increasing, which increases the risk of default. Therefore, we look at one specific solution and one focused action in form of a global matchmaking platform. Herein, we find that investors are actually looking for lower risk investable projects as well as to deploy capital. On the other hand, project developers are looking for funding and patient capital and to deploy innovative business models as well as technological solutions. I would like to highlight that we are working on a project pipeline of bankable projects through the regional platform for climate projects, the RPCP. And in that, we have partnered with the UN Regional Commission. And in 2023, in phase 2 of that project, we started with expression of interest of about 450 projects worth $500 billion and shortlisted about 63 projects in 35 countries worth $80 billion. At the end of 23, we had 19 projects which were financed with about $2 billion of funding flowing into these projects. So over the next year, the HLCs, with the support of COP30 presidency, intends to enable non-state actors to take green projects to final investment decisions. And we look forward to collaborating with industry and financiers to take this forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Last but by no means least, the World Bank.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Let me start with a bit of good news. And I think the good news is that we have seen now after the COVID crisis, after the global crisis that rattled the energy markets because of the war in Ukraine, we now see that a lot of commodity prices are settling. And we now see that some of the capital cost of equipment associated with investments in solar and in wind and in batteries is increasingly calming down. That is really good news. It is also good news that anywhere you look around the world, demand for electricity will only be going up and up and up, which means that this is an area that investors are looking at because they know that the business and the growth is going to be there. Now, the bad news, and to pour a little bit of cold water on what a lot of people have been saying here about reducing the cost of capital, is that because of the COVID crisis, because of what happened in the last 4 years, all the countries of the world are heavily indebted, which means that we have governments that will require to go to the markets and borrow a lot of money to keep on servicing their debt. So therefore, demand for debt is going to be high, and when demand is high, chances are that the costs are likely to remain high. So what is it that we can really do to make clean energy projects happen? On the side of the government, there are some simple things that are not happening as well as they can be happening. For instance, issuing permits, moving quickly things through bureaucracy, allowing investments on transmission. A lot of this stuff still takes a lot of time. It would makes investors very skeptical. Time is money. The perception of how quickly things move in government approvals, all of this tends to increase risk perceptions. So there are some simple things that government can do better, and to do that, they need stronger institutional government capacity. And this is one of the areas where it doesn't cost too much money, but it does take effort, it does take focus. And I think this is one of the areas on the World Bank that we will keep on working on. And we do, again, a bit of good news is we now have a suite of guarantees instruments for the private sector, for the public sector, for equity investors, for debt investors under our MEGA institution that can really help a lot. And we want to see how we can deploy them in the right countries where we see ambition and where we feel that when we all come together, we can really reduce risk perceptions. And this is what will help with, if not reducing the cost of capital, at least providing suitable terms and conditions. The last point I would like to make, and I'm closing, is that we're now coming to 10 years after the Paris Agreement. There's been a little bit of progress on Article 6 in the last COP29, but the reality is that when we look at carbon credit markets for clean energy, essentially rewarding countries for the additional efforts that they need to make, as the minister from the Philippines was saying, the fact that someone needs to pay if we want to be shutting down coal power plants earlier. Somewhere we have to find a way of cracking Article 6 carbon credit markets as soon as we can. I think with Brazil taking over at COP30, the efforts that are being made on trying to establish agreed ways of what is the best baseline on planning. These are the elements that we have to bring together, agree upon them, and build with that so that we can have flows from the richer countries for carbon credits to the developing world. I think Europe has a big role on that. Japan has a big role on that. A lot of the private sector in the United States, regardless of the politics, we know is interested in that. We need to crack on this, and we're happy to keep on working with everyone on that front as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a very rich discussion, and despite, I think, because of the complexity of all the different things that have to happen in the right sequence in order for the sort of inflection point to be triggered and the finance to flow, I think that this was a very useful session. It just reminds us of what the to-do list is. There's a to-do list for the multilateral system, and I think there are reforms that can help both understand risk better, increase financial flows. There are lots of things that countries themselves can do on the planning side and on the capacity side with international support. There are also extraordinary amounts of domestic savings that can be mobilized into support for energy transitions. And we know from the countries that already do that because of effective credit enhancement, etc., that this plays a very important role in giving confidence to project developers that there is a buy-in from the country's own domestic savings. We know that we need to defragment, and I think that this is really important. We've been talking about this since Irina began, and now seems to be the time when we actually should work together to do that. We also know that there are different ways to collaborate in support of country platforms, whether they're called JETPs or country platforms or whatever they're called. And there are many different examples of how to do this now, from Brazil to Bangladesh to South Africa to Indonesia. So how we organize ourselves as an energy community in order to be able to bring everything that we've got to offer in a way that meets a country platform, I think is important. IEA helpfully sort of said we've got to make available data. I mean, if you'll permit me, I hope that also means that IEA is going to start to support open source data in its own publications. And then I think this question that really came forward from a number of emerging market countries around the table, which is how do we reward in real time ambition in countries? We should have done it over the last 10 years, but how do we absolutely make sure that we do that? And because otherwise, I think the Secretary General in Brazil and all of us in support are going to have a hard time getting ambitious NDCs coming forward, if people can't know that the finance will be there on the other side. The final thing I'd say is I think it's interesting to talk about the scale of this. But we know that when we talk about, 31 trillion, eyes roll back, right? And people don't have a hard time understanding what that means. But we know country by country, we're talking about, I think for Barbados, 2 billion invested in Barbados will help Barbados be resilient, build the infrastructure it needs, etc. So Assistant Secretary General Hart doesn't need me to tell him that 2 billion is 10 times the annual wage bill of Liverpool Football Club. So, there are different ways to make the point about how we prioritise the mobilisation of finance in ways that political leaders and the general public can understand. Which, in my final point before I hand over to the Vice President, is that I think one of the things that we have to do is win back the narrative about why mobilising this finance, that it's there in the system, but it's not purposed, it's not directed, it's not moving. Why that is essential, and why the renewable energy revolution is going to be the way in which to meet the equity and justice goals of the SDG. So I think together we have a lot of things to do on the to-do list, and then we have a narrative that we have to win back in the year ahead. Please, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and also great appreciation and thanks to all our speakers. It has been really, really extremely focused, very comprehensive set of ideas, diversity of approaches, and very clear inputs. I'm gonna give the floor to Raul, and please, Raul, like everybody, you have a minute and a half to conclude, and I'm not going to take any time for reflections because Rachel already did a great job to do a reflection. So please, the last word is to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Your Excellency. And thank you, Rachel, for excellent moderation. I heard Liverpool twice, but I heard once that we have an arsenal of practical solutions. Today, we've heard from 12 member states about 20 acronyms. But then I heard from the UN Secretary General Office one key one, NDCs. And so if we focus on that, I think we'll be close to accelerating. We've also received significant invitations to go to Dar es Salaam, Seville, Paris, Washington. On the road ahead, let's walk the talk and really hope that we eliminate the fragmentation, we really see acceleration, and we move from billions to trillions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. And I guess this concludes our consideration for agenda item 8. And you are all invited for a very nice dinner, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much, everybody.